Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, I believe, that's Sejohn.
Oh man. Hey, I Porky, I cannot believe that in this day and age we still have a character that we all just love to hang out with that has a speech impediment. It's a little weird that out of all the weird corrections that Looney Tunes has made, that way they haven't done something about that.
They haven't done anything about that? Are you sure?
Oh, why have they?
Well, I mean, I don't. Welcome to the Say Report. It's a show about everything, and it's May, so it's Brendan Fraser History Month. And if you've been listening to the show, then you already know what we're going to be talking about today. It's Looney Tunes back in action.
And apparently, Devin here has some deep Looney Tunes lore that we need to get into. What?
No, I mean, there's a whole scene in it where Porky Pig and Speedy Gonzales lament political correctness and how it's ruined both of their careers. I wonder who wrote the book of love. It was Eugene Levy 2 episodes ago. Try to keep up. Anywho.
Yeah, nerds.
Anywho. Jesus, I gotta stop saying anywho. So I don't know. Have you seen any of the newer Looney Tunes stuff?
I have,
to
actually.
say that he still has his speech impediment?
I have, and I cannot recollect whether or not Porky Pig has a speech impediment, but I will say that one of the interesting things they've done with Speedy Gonzales is they've actually built him out as a character. So like he does things around town in the neighborhood. Like I think he works like at the grocery store or something like that. Like he is a hardworking member of the society, and it is not character specific that he is like able to race around. Like I'm sure they play with the joke, but it's not like it's not a joke about Mexicans being lazy anymore.
But it was like, never a joke about him being lazy.
No,
he's the fastest mouse in all of Mexico.
The joke was that because Mexicans are quote unquote lazy people, it's funny to have one that's not.
Oh.
I'm not like that was the joke of Speedy Gonzales.
But he had his cousin Pedro, the slowest mouse in all of Mexico.
There you go. Exactly.
I don't know. It's just,
but yeah, man.
I mean, I never had a problem with any of that because it was just entertainment for entertainment's sake.
Oh yeah, and we all know that can't hurt anybody, right? So
I guess that's true. I don't know. I think of the core cast of the Looney Tunes though, and I don't ever look at them like, hey, you guys, you're a problem. Like there are side characters and there are definitely merry melodies that are problematic.
Yeah.
But I mean, in one way, I dig that we talk about representation. Not we, you and I don't usually have this conversation, but there is a lot of discussion about representation and that, people should be able to see themselves in the media that they enjoy. And yes, Porky Pig has a stutter, but I never thought that was the joke. I thought it was just part of his character. So, like, if I were a kid who growing up had a stutter, it would be like, look at Porky Pig. He stutters, and he's still a Looney Tune. He still gets to hang out with the group. Am I completely off base
I can appreciate and understand that, but we have pretty clear examples over the years of people in groups pointing at Looney Tunes and saying, hey, that poorly represents us. I think we pointed out a prime one in anyone of Latin American descent.
Well, no, it's interesting that you say that because when there was that whole let's pull Speedy Gonzales off the airwaves, it was a Latin-led petition that got them to reinstate and show those on television.
For sure. There are multiple facets on all sides
yes,
of the
I understand that. Right.
But there are definitely people out there that do feel that way.
Yes.
Who look at those representations.
So I guess, as we've stated multiple times on this show, but it's been a minute since we've said it, I am the optimist, Sejohn is the pessimist. So I look at characters who have speech impediments and who represent a group of people as like, this is good, this is positive representation. And Sejohn, through his pessimist vision, which it's good to have a pessimist in the team, because otherwise, when I fail, when that day happens, I wouldn't know how to deal with it because I wouldn't have had Sejohn whispered in my ear all these times things that could go wrong or ways that things could be misinterpreted. So yes, I'm choosing to look at it from the optimistic side of view and saying, like, if there was a kid who stutters who sees Porky Pig as a Looney Tune getting to hang out with Bugs Bunny, he's like, I can hang out with the cool kid even though it's hard for me to talk.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely can be an aspect of it, but like there's this idea that representation has to be fair, and that means that there has to be, you know, like an exploration of all sides of that. And this is not anything that was ever thought about when the Looney Tunes were created, but there's a reason why there's a number of Looney Tunes cartoons that just will never be seen again on television.
Right.
You know, I'm sure that there are ways to access them in the world, but I won't say that they've been completely like burned somewhere. But I mean, maybe some have at this point. But that's one of the things that's really interesting about watching this movie is that how much they skirt around certain issues with characters, but yet how much they lean into it with others and the like. And it's really weird. And that's not just in terms of like the upsetting, offensive stuff, but also characteristics and the like. So it's a pretty odd movie to watch, to be honest, looking back at what the world is now and what it was in 2003 and what it was back in the 1940s and 50s when these characters were created.
I do not disagree with anything that you just said, especially because this movie is a time capsule in the weirdest way possible. Like, Brendan Fraser and Jenna Elfman were at the top of their game. There is a reason that they are the leads in this movie.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind that, like, what we need the two hot ticket items right now. Who's that going to be? And it's like, well, Brendan Fraser and Jenna Elfman, they're pretty hot right now.
Well, and not even just them. Also, from a creative standpoint, Joe Dante had just come off of the weird success of Small Soldiers.
That's very true. But he's Joe Dante. I mean, he did Gremlins.
Yeah, but
like, he was
weird if you look back on his like career, he did Gremlins, then like nothing, then Small Soldiers, then this. So like, yeah, he did Gremlins, but it's not like he was doing that every year. You know, he was in like Steven Spielberg's like boys club that like would show up on all types of Spielberg projects, right? And so like he was definitely part of that group of guys that were like working, but it's odd that Joe Dante himself, if you actually look at his film career, he's not the kind of guy that's pumping a film out every other year. Like sometimes there's a good 5 or 6 year stretch between his movies.
Right. Plus he was really good friends with the Warner Brothers, like the people responsible for Looney Tunes. Because that was his whole motivation to make Looney Tunes back in action. He also felt that Space Jam completely ruined all the characters he knew as Looney Tunes. So he's like, I gotta bring them back to their roots. And I think a big part of that is the political correctness, which it's so weird though. It's weird when we watch these movies, and the weird movie last year was Crash. Remember when we watched Crash and you're like, is Crash still relevant in 2018? Yeah. And it was. We discussed it pretty deeply and determined that yes, because the things that were being highlighted and spotlighted in Crash are still going on in 2018. A lot of the stuff that is mentioned in terms of like comedy and the like are still the questions that are being asked now by comedians regarding what is funny and what is just offensive.
Well, and what does it mean to have a character that is one note? Because I think one of the big things that's important about this movie is the whole story, on the Looney Tunes side of it at least, is Daffy trying to be more than just the butt of the joke. And I think that's the key, is that I think that's where the quote-unquote offensiveness of the old Looney Tunes cartoons comes in, and when people start to be offended by the characterizations. It's fine to have a character that has a stutter as long as that's not the thing that defines him. But you've got to remember that the joke with Porky Pig, when he first showed up on screen and opened his mouth, that was the joke. There was no depth. There was no thought behind it. It's look at how funny it sounds when somebody talks like this. That's offensive. It's different to have representation That's very different from a character that is like, hey, that's a real person I can connect and relate to because they have facets to their personality, right? And that's what you see in weird ways in this movie, is them building these characters out in different ways and uh, having to oddly draw lines about whether or not these are good or bad people, right? Like there's it's interesting that through all of this, Daffy is not ever once questioned as being a good guy. We know that he's good because he's not one of the baddies. He doesn't show up on the villains team, right?
But he kind of okay. So when you say he doesn't show up on the villains team, what do you mean exactly? In this film or in the pantheon of Looney Tunes?
No, in this film. In this film in
Okay.
particular, like he is established as a good guy, and it's made extremely clear that he's considered one of the good guys because he literally does not show up on the literal team of villains we are introduced to. Like they straight up label people as evil.
Yes, you're not wrong. And it's all people who were sort of villainous up to that point.
Right.
Though I have one problem with this film. I guess we're just going for it, right? Like this is just going to be a smorgasbord of Looney Tunes.
Of course.
Okay. I never really viewed Wile E. Coyote as a villain. And I don't love that he is categorized as a villain in this film.
Yeah. I guess the thing for me is that I've never considered Wile E. Coyote one way or the other.
Yeah,
So
no, he's
labeling
sort
him
of
as
like chaotic neutral.
yeah,
If I had to use D&D terms to describe him. Because,
Well, again,
he's just trying to eat.
exactly. He's just following animal instinct. He is a coyote going after a wild bird, right? Like, and again, it's not a very deep character, so there's not too much for us to latch on or make these decisions. So the movie has to kind of make them for us.
But he is a deep character. That's the other problem, is that they go with the Wile E. Coyote who only speaks in signs. But I've seen the Wile E. Coyote where he, stops and talks to me in this deep, robust voice. It's like freaking Kelsey Grammer playing Sideshow Bob in the Wile E. Coyote, talking like, I'm actually quite intelligent. I love that. And that's in early Looney Tunes. Like, that joke happened. So it's weird that they also understood that depth could be funny as well.
Yeah.
And then created such shallow characters. Wow.
Well,
I just stumbled into problematic, but continue.
Well, but like the idea being that the joke, and again, this all comes down to like the ideas of like what's behind comedy, and like you were saying, like dealing with the idea of what's funny, and for all intents and purposes, edgy is funny, right? Like that's never not been the case, even now, in terms of when people are trying to figure out how close to the edge they can get, and some people are trying to figure out whether or not we should back away from it. There's still humor to be found there, and so there's this weird idea that like you have to decide when the joke is worth like continuing, and whether your plot development, your character development, whether or not your depth needs to be there. And it's this weird trade-off sometimes of like, sometimes you have to sacrifice a little depth in order to make the joke funny. And so I'm thinking of like, I'm thinking specifically of like moments in Futurama and trying to figure out whether or not Bender is good or evil, right? And there's times when it's funny when he does something really malicious, and so they let him do something really malicious for the joke, or for the joke of the plot. But then there's these beautiful moments where he clearly loves and cares about human characters. So which is he? Is he the kind of robot that's like, all humans must die? Or is he the kind of robot that is like, nah, I'm just fucking with you, I just want a beer, right? And sometimes there's very contradictory moments in that show of that character. And that's okay because it's a cartoon. And that's one of the beautiful things about that world and that style, is that we are able to forgive some of those oxymoronic moments, right? Because the joke is worth it for us. And so it's weird to think about the conversation of representation in that realm, when like I thought that everybody understood that there was a point at which it's just a joke, but you have to understand that for everybody that's a different point, right? And so it's harder and harder and harder to make comedy. And so this whole movie is like an exploration into whether or not the Looney Tunes still work, and I don't know whether or not they find a good answer at the end of this movie.
Oh, I don't think they do at all. I don't think the answer works at all. The one that keeps sticking out of my mind as we have this conversation is when Bugs Bunny, I mean, it's a great moment in terms of someone who was anti-Space Jam, like getting their licks in. And it's Bugs Bunny out to dinner with Jenna Elfman's character. I can't think of her character's name. She was never not Jenna Elfman to me.
Yeah. Kate.
Kate,
Isn't her name
yes,
Kate?
yeah, her name is Kate. Thank you. Well, he's out with Kate, and she's like, "What we need to get you is a sexy female lead," and that's Lola Bunny. That's what we're talking about. And he goes, "Usually I play my own," and he does the cross dressing, and ta-da, that's problematic now, and that hit me in a way that I didn't expect this movie to hit me. If I can say that, like, yes.
Yeah.
Because in my freshman year of high school, I worked up an act for the talent show with my friend Michelle, and Michelle played piano. I did not play piano, and I was a singer. You know, I like to sing. I like to croon, right? Usually not very good, or like to the beat of my own drum. So we're sitting there, me and Michelle, and we're like, we should put together an act for the talent show, because we were both like, we wanted to be the stars. So we put together this act singing I'm Just Wild About Harry, right?
Yep.
Famous in the Looney Tunes thing, so it's connected. It's not just about me. You know, Michigan J. Frog sings it in that fantastic, you know, Looney Tunes, which I'm so happy that that just happens in this movie, but in the background.
Yeah.
Sorry. So we worked our little bus off to put it together, and then, like, it was, all right, so Michelle will be playing the piano, I'll be singing I'm Just Wild About Harry, and that's funny. And then Michelle's mother's like, well, why doesn't Michelle dress up in, like, a nice suit, like a male, and you wear a dress? And, you know, freshman year, it's funny, right? Because it's also, like, this role reversal of the song. Because it's a man singing the song, and while, like, usually it's a man playing the piano while a woman sings that song. That's the whole point of the song. I'm Just Wild About Harry. And all I want to do is sing I'm Just Wild About Harry right now. I'm very sorry if it happens. And we worked it out, and it was good. And it was a tasteful dress. Like, it was like, you know, like we're performing at you know, Carnegie Hall, not the Coventry High School auditorium. Like, we wanted to look good. And as soon as we get up there to audition for the talent show, they're like, no, dancers, no, you can't dress like a woman. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, why not? And they're like, because you're making fun of people who do that.
See, here's where I would disagree entirely with that sentiment, right? Is I think that there is something to be said about cross-dressing in especially when you're talking about things like theater and acting and stage and film and all this stuff, is I think that there is a perfect place for that type of act, as well as even some humor to be found in it, for sure, you know. And as long as the joke is, again, as long as it's not something that's putting the person that is performing the act in a weak position, you know, you're not making them look bad, essentially, right? And that's the problem with the Porky Pig stuff, is that it puts him in a weak position when he can't speak properly in the old cartoons. Whereas when Bugs dresses as a woman, it always puts him in a position of power in the moment.
Yes.
And so there's actually something to be said about that, right?
Right. No, that's very truthful. Usually he's dressing as a woman in order to seduce the villain of the episode.
Yeah, but on top of that, to also, you know, make sure that villain gets their comeuppance and to protect himself, because, like, the whole point of those old cartoons is always somebody trying to eat him, right?
Yes.
But I mean, and I think of things outside of the Looney Tunes that do this now and perform it really well. There's an entire subplot on Star and the Forces of Evil, this fantastic show full of empowerment, where the character Marco has an alter ego of Princess Marco, who ends up, like, leading revolutions and, like, being hugely important to this group of women in the show, that he is there as this character in a dress, and, like, it's this huge thing that he is that is part of him, right? So I do think there are ways to do that, and for it to not be. So I don't know. I didn't actually have any weird moment with Bugs in that, because, like I said, I've always envisioned that particular thing as not necessarily being so, insensitive in the fact that I'm sure that they didn't think about any of this when they were doing it back then.
Right.
But actually, like, luckily stumbling into not as offensive as they could have been, I guess.
No, my point is just watching this movie, and then suddenly I'm 13 years old again, being told you can't dress in a dress and sing a song because it could be interpreted as you're making fun of people who are male who wear dresses and sing a song. And I looked at them and I said, how do you know that's not the person that I am?
Yeah.
And they like looked at me dead-eyed. And I'm like, yeah, like you didn't even consider that. Like, it might be a consideration. Like, it would be one thing if they're like, well, we don't want people to make fun of you for doing this. Like, we're trying to protect your feelings, you stupid 13-year-old. Nope, we're trying to protect hypothetical feelings. And then I'm sitting there like, what if this is who I really was? Like, it was weird. And it felt weird hearing Jenna Elfman say it to Bugs Bunny. Because it's like, Bugs Bunny is never, like exactly what you just said. He doesn't dress in drag as a cheap joke. He does it for a reason and has a purpose. So I don't know. It was weird. That was the thing that struck me about this film.
Well, and I think the weirdness legitimately in this entire movie and in this conversation and everything, I think it all comes from the idea that they obviously were not thinking this stuff when they created this back then. You know what I mean? Like when they were doing these things, they were not putting this kind of consideration or thought into these characters. But we live in a world in which we can't let things die because of nostalgia, right? And I mean, you know, we breathe and live this shit. So I'm not knocking nostalgia in any way, but we can't let shit die, right? So how do we take these things that didn't have these thoughts and these concepts behind them when they were created, and how do we bring them into this world where we need to start applying that logic or we're not going to survive, you know? And that's what this movie really is a test of. It's a test of trying to bring these characters into this day and age. Now, granted, this is already 15 years old, right? 2003, I think, is when this movie is. Yeah, so, like, I mean, we're already talking about a movie that's already old by our standards again. But even still, 2003, and, you know, maybe then in that moment when we were still trying to sort through the beginnings of these conversations, it was kind of problematic for him to be just throwing a dress on because we hadn't quite figured out whether or not we could be there yet. And like I said, I feel like we're at a point now where where I think it would be okay. But even then, you know, that's my opinion. Who knows? I know for a fact there are people out there that disagree with that thought right now.
Yeah, and that is what I'm like. The big highlight of it is that the conversations that this movie brings up and introduces to the table 15 years ago are still conversations that we haven't found the answer to.
Yeah.
And that was unexpected, and it was really cool because it made the film feel more timeless in a way that, I mean, you talking about that stuff, imagine if we had that conversation in 2003 and as a society we this is the answer in 2005.
Mm-hmm.
This is our declaration of comedy, and it was signed in 2005. And in that declaration of comedy, it said, you know, it's okay for a man to wear a dress for any reason in this, or like these specific reasons, right?
Right.
So then if we were watching it today in 2019 and Bugs Bunny is told, you can't dress as a woman, Bugs Bunny, the world would be like, whoa! How are you telling him that he can't do something for comedy?
Yeah.
Like, it would seem that same outdated way as when you watch Revenge of the Nerds and you're like, whoa, that was rape. Or when you watch 16 Candles and you're like, whoa, that was rape and human trafficking.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to be in this day and age and try and be this fan, and, you know, and I think that we tackle this a lot more often than you than you might think. You know, you mentioned that we don't have these conversations often, but I feel like we have these conversations all the time.
I just kind of realized that as I did the whoa, and I'm like, these are the examples that I've already cited. I'm quoting myself when I do those whoa, that's problematic in 2019.
Yeah.
Because I watched it and it's that's freaking problematic in 2019.
Can we talk about something that was problematic in 2003 and is still problematic now? Yeah,
I'd love to talk about it.
Any and all of Steve Martin's acting choices in this movie.
Whoa! I'm gonna need some citations. I'm gonna go
Okay.
Wikipedia on your ass.
I point to any and all scenes of him in this movie. What you would explain to me right now what choices he was making and why, and I will sit back and I will let you have your chance and try to tell me that any of it made any sense.
So I believe if I were to assess Steve Martin's performance in this film, this feels like Steve Martin's reparations for the Muppet movie. I think we could trace a line from Steve Martin appearing as the waiter in the Muppet movie directly to Steve Martin appearing as the chairman of Acme in Looney Tunes Back in Action, and see, he did this, but he said, one day, if I make X amount of money as an actor, or one day, if these like 3 things ever come to be, I get to be in a movie with beloved characters, and I get to play the role that I should have played in the Muppet movie. And Hollywood, old man Hollywood, right? The personification of Hollywood, right? To go with that Thief of Time bullshit you made me read. Actually, I really liked it. I don't know how otherwise to describe Hollywood coming to life and being a dude. And he's like, sure things.
Gods, we can go that way.
What? What'd you
We
say?
can go American Gods if you want. We can do Neil Gaiman if that suits you better.
Isn't it both Neil Gaiman?
Well, no, Terry Pratchett.
Terry Pratchett. I'm sorry. Woo! I guess, yeah, we could go American Gods. No, but I mean, like, I have a very set image in my head of what old man Hollywood looks like. I mean, he's probably problematic, too. The character I've just created of old man Hollywood, he's a bit of a lech. Let's just be honest. There's no way that he can't escape that based on what Hollywood has, is, and will be.
And always was.
Yeah. Has, will, and I don't know, whatever. I thought I covered the was. Yeah. And he's old man Hollywood, so you know that he was there when Natalie Wood got thrown off a boat. It was him and Lorenzo Lamas sitting there playing Chinese checkers.
God.
What was it? Oh, so old man Hollywood, like Steve Martin says that. Like, he's like, I will cameo in this movie, and I will let Kermit the Frog make me look like an idiot. But one day, if I do these 3 arbitrary things, old man Hollywood, I get to be in another movie, and I get to play the character I should have played in the Muppet movie.
And no one gets to tell me no matter what choice I make, no matter what.
And old man Hollywood, sure thing, Steve Martin.
That's a pretty spot on Orson Welles, actually. I got to tell you.
Yeah, I know. That's kind of what I was going for. It's Orson Welles with a bigger cigar. It's if Churchill and Orson Welles went through the fly machine at the same time. And there's old man Hollywood. We will film them on the beaches. Anywho, and those 3 things happened. Make a movie about being an actor performing in Mexico heroics. Check.
This is Steve Martin's bucket list.
Yep. Sell an album. Sell 1 million copies of an album with you playing banjo. Checkity check. I don't know. Murder somebody who was bothering old man Hollywood.
Finally get to make Shop Girl. Check.
No, who played Pink Panther? Peter Sellers, right?
Yeah.
Murder Peter Sellers.
Murder Peter.
And then Steve Martin's like, I got the Pink Panther.
It's mine now.
I did it. No one will ever think of him as
Bring me the one they call
Clouseau.
Beyonce.
So he does all that, and then they're like, fine, you get to be in this Looney Tunes movie. And he gets to play, oh my God, screw you. For just winding me up and placing me down and letting me go off the rails. I am a Lionel train just going down the basement. I'm about to hit a wall. So he's playing in this film really a human who is a cartoon character in the weirdest way possible. Imagine if Judge Doom in Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, full title. Imagine if Judge Doom were not actually a toon.
But if he was just a weird human.
Like, he's a weird human who, like, wants the acceptance of toons, so he acts like them.
And then when he doesn't get it, he turns on them.
Yes. But really, he's turning on humanity. We could talk about the fact that his character has turned on humanity in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
And
can I put my theory out there about Steve Martin in this one?
Yeah.
I do think that if you think about him as a living cartoon character, that definitely, it doesn't give a reason to what he does, but it definitely explains why he was doing a lot of what he was doing. But I legitimately thought once his plan was revealed, I had this thought in my head as somebody that has watched this movie many times, thought, oh, have I always just missed the fact that he was a monkey turned into a human? Have I always just missed that?
That would be a better movie. And this is a pretty good movie.
I think that if you look at it, like, and in the ways that he's, like, physically changing his face, there's almost, like, a weird, like, long monkey faceness to what he's doing and his haircut and everything. And I was just thinking, oh, I must have just completely always missed the fact that he was a monkey at one point. And then it never happened. And I was like, okay, I don't know why that seemed to make everything better.
What a fantastic secondary like satirical stance for Joe Dante to take, if that were like a true thing in this film, that the people who run our businesses are basically monkeys in
just
human
a bunch
form.
of monkeys turned into humans. Oh man.
Yeah, because you're not wrong. Well, that's a good explanation too. That's a better explanation than my Old Man Hollywood thing, but mostly because I'm afraid that Old Man Hollywood's gonna come and get me in the night now. I feel like I've called him into existence.
You said his name 5 times.
And he's gonna come and he's gonna get me so he can keep me in a box until he needs me again to restore his power. Bam. In-cart
Space Jam 2.
This is Space Jam 2.
You get the Wayne Knight role.
Oh, I'd be okay with that. I mean, you're Newman, but I'd be all right with it.
You know, I have to actually rescind that thought that this is Space Jam 2. I have to take that back because I feel like there is a distinct difference between Space Jam and this movie that does need to stand out, that does make this not necessarily work as Space Jam 2. And that's the fact that the Looney Tunes in this world exist within this world and are like all over it. Like it's not just one area. They're not hidden from society in any way. Like they are part of this world. Whatever this universe is that this movie creates is not the same universe as Space Jam.
Except for the fact that at the end of the film, it is revealed that the whole movie has been them shooting a movie.
That's true.
So,
but again, they exist in the world. Like you see that there's characters around and humans, whereas in Space Jam they don't exist, right? They exist in this like underground world that they have to dig the ground up to get to. So like even then that's not the same world as Space Jam, unless we're talking about like after the events of Space Jam, Michael Jordan somehow brought the Looney Tunes in, out into the open, right?
No, that can't be it, because there's like for real an established history that Daffy has been working at Warner Brothers. But again, it could be like we have to step a further ring of meta out in this movie to question the world in which the film is being shot, because everything that you see is a movie being made. There's no moment in this film that is not actually a movie, and that's crazy. And that's only because of the very last scene where DJ punches Brendan Fraser. That's not the movie, because the movie has wrapped up.
Except that the implication is that DJ has been the DJ that we've been watching all along, and this Brendan Fraser has just been chilling out.
Yeah, well, he's the stuntman. Brendan Fraser is doing the other stuff in it. So then he shoots that final scene as the stuntman for Brendan Fraser, and then it's weird. It's real weird. It's like a further ring of meta that I don't know, like Julia Roberts had to have been involved in some way. She loves meta so much. No, it's just, it's that left me unsettled yesterday as I was driving to go see like Detective Pikachu, I was talking about Looney Tunes Back in Action, and I'm like, oh, like there's so many levels of meta in this movie. Like, when do we get to the real world? I don't think we do.
No, I don't think we're ever established in the real world at all.
But there's that moment, and the reason why, and it's supported that it's all part of the movie because of that little remark where they come across the Walmart in the desert, and he goes, "Are you responsible for this?"
And looks right at the camera, right? Yeah.
And it's not just that he looks right at the camera; he's also talking to Jenna Elfman as the vice president of comedy for Warner Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little exhausting trying to wrap your head around just what exactly it exists as. The only reason why I consider it a semi-sequel to Space Jam is because it started out as a sequel to Space Jam called Spy Jam.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But I think the world that they establish, which is much more in the vein of like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where like tunes are just there and part of the world and everybody just knows about their existence. Like, I think that's a much better world for this particular story. You know, what works in Space Jam works because of the established lore of that world, right? And I don't think that would necessarily fly again here. Like, I don't know how you could tell this story if there wasn't this whole aspect to the whole movie aspect, which is just glorious. Like, I love movies about movies. I'm a sucker for that kind of thing, and this movie basks in that every step of the way. So I cannot imagine this movie without that element, and I don't know how you would work that in a Space Jam sense.
Yeah, you're 100% right. Because if anything, I'm upset that there's not more reference to the fact that it's a movie in a movie, or like that it exists in the same world. Because a scene that just made me cheer was Matthew Lillard having lunch with Scooby and Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? And Shaggy being like, "You totally messed me up, man. That's not how I sound at all."
Yeah, the lunch scene is pretty fantastic. Yeah, and I wish that we had been able to see more than just Warner Brothers characters. You know, I mean,
and that was the plan. Like there was a point in time where like Droopy Dog showed up.
Yeah,
and this is really one of those films where I think if Joe Dante had been allowed to go with his actual vision, because he has said that like, nothing that I envisioned for this film is what you see on the screen because of Warner Brothers' involvement in it.
Yeah.
And because this film is considered a failure. This is a rare failure for Brendan Fraser. Which, like, I said that as sort of a joke, but it's also kind of true. Like, a lot of his movies make money.
Well, and it's important to remember that, let's talk about what failure means. It made like 70 million when all was said and done in when it was in theaters, and it was an $80 million movie to make. So they didn't make it by like $10 million. So it's considered a flop because it doesn't make its bank back, right? But we've got to remember that it's a kids movie and it's about the Looney Tunes. So it might not have succeeded as a film, but I'm sure it put money in people's pockets, right? By the time you think about
like, quote the Warner Brothers, that's not $1 billion.
Yeah. If they ever expected this movie to make $1 billion, then they were idiots from the get-go.
Right, no, that's in the movie. That's my favorite scene of the movie when they're like, "You're fired," and she's like, "Fired? I've made you $950 million," and they just look at her dead eye and go, "That's not $1 billion." And that's another crazy thing as we look at like Endgame and Infinity War being some of the first movies to make $1 billion.
Domestic, yeah.
Like, no one was making you $1 billion, Warner Brothers.
Yeah, man. I gotta say that one of my favorite visual jokes in the whole movie is Bugs as the third Warner brother.
Oh yeah, that whole scene is really good. What he does,
yeah. The Looney Tunes without Daffy was pretty funny, and then the that moment though where she walks by the two of them and then he pops up between them, I don't know why, but that got me so good, you know. Looney Tunes jokes still work, man.
The Looney Tunes work, but here's a dangling thread that I've just found my way back to. if I had to categorize antagonists in the Looney Tunes world, I would put Daffy in terms of like threat level to Bugs Bunny a step higher than Wile E. Coyote. And that's why it bothered me that he's an Acme agent. Also, like, if he works for Acme, how come he's got to pay for everything? He's basically he's basically a Mary Kay saleswoman for Acme.
I mean, everything we know about Acme from this movie, does it really surprise you that they make their own agents pay for materials?
But I don't think they make all of them pay. I feel like that's the problem. Like I want to root for Wile E. Coyote. I wish that he had the moment of I'm gonna be your buddy, the way that like the Tasmanian Devil kind of does. I don't know.
When does Taz get that moment? Just remind me.
Well, when it's revealed that Bill Goldberg, the whole movie, has been She-Devil.
Yes. And so he gets his happy ending.
So he gets his happy ending. Yeah. So it's like, oh, okay. And he's free. He's in Africa. He's no longer in a cage in Acme headquarters.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. They just kind of get left back there, and they never have to show back up again.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it would be nice if when Marvin the Martian gets into a spaceship, if Wile E. Coyote gave them a spaceship. Like just have that moment for him, because there are outright villains in Looney Tunes.
Mm-hmm.
And forget, I mean, what's it? The Montana Max is what I want to say, but Yosemite Sam, is always gonna be a bad guy.
Yeah,
there's no redemption for him. Like, and that's one of the weird things about Space Jam is that Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd have those weird redemption moments. Like, I like that Marvin the Martian is not redeemed. Like, he is the referee. And it makes perfect sense that he is the referee because he is from both worlds.
Yeah, he is a Martian, but he is also a Toon. So, yeah.
So I get that. But it's this weird thing where you have the two of them come together and, like, we're all family. And it's like, no, but Elmer Fudd, he's a villain. I mean, well, he's an antagonist. I don't know. Is he villainous? I think
that's but I think that's the joke, right, in the movie is Bugs going, wait a minute, like, I knew that you were an idiot, but I didn't know that you were, like, evil. And he goes, nope, yep, turns out I worship the Dark Lord. It's like, what? Oh,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, they lean into, like, why he is bad. And I get it, too. Like, I was just thinking about A Night at the Opera, or it's something like that, right? The opera one is a good one. Yeah. When he is dressed as the Viking, and he's, like, calling down thunder and lightning to kill Bugs. Like, yeah, he looks freaking scary in that moment. He doesn't look like a befuddled hunter at that time.
Right.
But Yosemite Sam, always bad. And I wonder, this is a question I wondered as I was watching this movie, was Yosemite Sam always, like, miserly and, like, a Scrooge McDuck, I love money character?
Well, he was a gold digger. Like, when you get introduced to him in earlier cartoons, his whole thing is that he's a prospector.
Yeah, he's a prospector.
So, like, so I mean, like, the pursuit of gold has always been part of his character. Whether or not he's been successful in it is different. I think that's something that's come up more and more in later iterations of him, because I think even, like, the cartoon show treats him as, like, a billionaire and stuff like that, and that idea that he did strike it rich in that time.
But I feel like he became rich after they introduced Montana Max in Tiny Toons.
Probably.
And they're like, oh, it's funny if he's rich and evil. It's not just, it's funny if he has to be evil. Yosemite Sam can't not be evil, but it's funny if he's rich and evil too. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like it just felt like one of those moments where, okay, this Yosemite Sam, the way he's acting, feels like they saw Montana Max and they're like, this was a good direction to go with this character.
Right.
This was a good direction to go with this character. Let's extrapolate it And
Well, yeah, that's what I mean when I was saying earlier that they're starting to
about
build these
depth, yeah.
characters out, right? Like they're starting to develop the background for these characters in a way that the old cartoons never had to, never let alone, care to. And so yeah, reaching onto anything that they really can, and the Montana Max stuff and the Tiny Toon stuff is a really interesting thing to point to, because Elvira is always seen as very antagonistic in that show. Every time she gets a pet, like it's always a bad scene for the pet, right? Despite the fact that she's not outright evil, which is why I think that it's so funny that they feel they have to justify making Elmer Fudd one of the bad guys in this movie, right? And whereas with Yosemite Sam, a la Montana Max, they don't have to. You already know that he's one of the bad guys. Yeah, man.
And I love that of course he would own a casino. And since we're talking about the casino, let's talk about the other human who's on the DVD case.
For some reason.
One scene.
In one scene.
Heather Locklear, who is Heather Locklear in this movie because Brendan Fraser and Scrubs? No, because Scrubs was not till later, right? So is Brendan Fraser in Scrubs because of Heather Locklear? It was like one of these things where I'm like, how does this timeline work?
Yeah, I also kind of got the feeling that character in earlier iterations of the script was probably more important. Especially if you mentioned that it was supposed to be more and more of a spy spoof rather than an action movie spoof.
Well, there was that moment where, at the end, where the chairman of Acme, Steve Martin, let's just call him Steve Martin. I don't know why I'm trying to use his character name, because he doesn't have one.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Exactly. That's not a character name. That's how you, that's the chairman. And here's a footrest. Yes. Where he's like, there's only one woman I want to have with me. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if it were Heather Locklear? No, it was Mary, the female VP he sexually assaulted earlier.
It appears to still be, because she clearly does not no means no. I know at the end of this movie she's upset at what happens to him, but there's definitely clearly a look on her face when he chooses her in that moment where she's just like, this is not what I want.
But it's one of those things, that's kind of a gross moment, because also in the interest of self-preservation, she doesn't want to be a monkey.
Yeah. Right, exactly. That's what I mean, is she's just I don't want this, but I am literally stuck here with no choice. I either use my body to get myself to safety, or I become a monkey. And it's just okay, yeah.
Can I say this, though? I like the plan. His evil plan is so good.
It's so stupid. It's so good.
It's just because it's the fact that they talk about the blue monkey diamond, and they're like, it has the power to turn people into monkeys, and then monkeys back into people. And it's well, that's a weird distinction. But then it's not a weird distinction. It's because we're going to turn them into monkeys and have them work in our Acme factories, and then turn them back into people to sell them the shoddily made Acme products.
Which is...
I'm going to be rich!
Okay, I don't know whether or not to applaud you or to ignore you right now, but here's what we're going to do. It's the second part of the plan that really sells it for me.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly.
We're gonna turn everybody into monkeys to make our shit. It's just oh, that's a dastardly evil plan. But what makes it so funny and clearly his plan is the idea to then turn them back and try and sell them this shit. That can't possibly work, right?
I mean, first of all, they've been monkeys for how long? How long are you keeping them as monkeys to build the product?
Right.
Are you paying them a wage?
Well, and
or do they get turned back into humans and
with no money?
Then they have no money to buy a product.
Yeah. It's the funny thing about capitalism is if you have an actual monopoly, you actually end up kind of burning yourself out. But there's also this moment when we see Brendan Fraser, the only character to really truly in this movie get turned into a monkey and then get turned back. We see when he first comes back that there's a second of him realizing that he's human again, and that's after only a few moments of being a monkey. Can you imagine if somebody was a monkey for 6 months and then got turned back into a human? At that point we would just have feral children everywhere. So
my argument though is maybe he only remembers because of how short his time as a monkey was.
Remembers to be human.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Remembers
That's what
that
I'm
he
saying.
was human.
Yeah, so after 6 months of turning a monkey back into a human, like, oh, they're just gone full monkey now because they just don't remember. Like they were a monkey so long they'll never remember what humanity was like.
No, I think that the brain would eventually recalibrate. I mean, like, I'm great. I don't know. It has these. It's such a good plan though, and I love it. It made me happy, but it really made me happy because there was that little sticking point of my mind of it has the power to turn people into monkeys and then turn monkeys back into people. And I'm like, what a weird distinction of this relic that it can do both. And it's like, well, yeah, that's sort of how it works. One would imagine that the item that can turn people into things could also reverse it.
Yeah,
That's sort of magical artifact 101.
Yeah, it's pretty golden. Yeah. Oh man, because just every scene with him is just like, just fucking every time he moved, every time his body moved, and every time a word came out of his mouth, I just was just stunned. I was just stunned in silence because I could not figure out what I was supposed to be gleaning about this character, what his deal was supposed to be. His choices were clearly based on like nothing, and that's the part that just completely threw me.
Well, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's Steve Martin to a T for me. Like, I'm not trying to be rude when I say that. I don't want this to be misinterpreted at all. I feel like Steve Martin, in terms of like the actors that I have seen, is one of the only actors that I can point at and say, like, his actions have no thought behind them. He literally just jumps into the scene and you get what you get.
Yeah, I would say that's true in something like The Jerk. Like, I would give you that, right? But there's plenty of roles where he works, where he, let me put it to you this way. In The Jerk, it works because he is the main focus of that movie, and it is established that he is an outsider in that world, and that is like part of the plot and recognized. In this movie, it establishes all of that same stuff, but it's never addressed. The movie never truly addresses how weird he is. You know what I mean? And that's why I think I wanted him to be a monkey, is I think I wanted some justification, some reason. But I think it goes back to what you were saying about how we don't really get much about him. All we know about him is his name, which is Mr. Chairman. That's it. There's nothing deeper to him. So, like, in terms of this whole thing about, like, them trying to bring depth to these characters, I don't know what they were doing or what they were trying to say by introducing this villainous character that has literally no depth or explanation to him. We get no backstory on him. We get no, like, how did he become the chairman of Acme like this? He's clearly out of his mind. He's clear, like, did he just inherit it? Is he the one that created Acme? Has he been around for forever? Like, what is his deal?
Yeah, you're not wrong. These are the questions that the movie honestly leaves you with. And it's why I would like to see, like, the original script.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's there, and then they're like, no, we don't need justifications for the villains. Warner Brothers is like, make this movie so that the Looney Tunes are acceptable in the 21st century. No, you don't need to make the villain understandable. He's just the villain. You know, that you're asking me to do
focus.
The same thing. What? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you do is they go out and they find a comedian that can do that kind of thing. And here's the thing is, by the time this movie gets made, it's 25 years since The Jerk. Like, that's not the kind of actor that I imagine Steve Martin is in 2003. Like, I'll give it to you that he had that about him back in his, like, SNL days and maybe even in the 80s, in the 90s and stuff, right? Like there was definitely moments where he could have those kinds of characters. But by the time you get to 2003, Steve Martin, like, he's so far removed from that type of comedy. Like, at that point, why aren't you getting like a Jim Carrey? And even then, at that point, it's a little late for even a Jim Carrey, right? But like somebody in that vein, you know?
Yeah, I don't know who it would be in
I honestly wonder. Yeah, I don't know,
like,
but I
Tom
wonder.
Green?
What we would have to do is we would have to look at the SNL cast and see like what that had been. Like Will Ferrell, probably, right? Like Will Ferrell probably would have been the pull.
Yeah, especially considering he had done like Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Back 2 years earlier.
and Zoolander and all of that stuff around this time, right?
Yeah.
Like he is definitely the guy that I would more expect to see in this
You know,
role.
I could see Ben Stiller doing it too.
Sure.
Ben Stiller taking his Tony Perkins,
Hmm.
villain of Dodgeball. I can't think of that character's name, and that's really bothering me. And just turning it to 11.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, because that's the type of villain that the Mr. Chairman is. He's one of those
Yeah.
villains who's just like evil because it's fun to be evil. In
Yeah,
fact,
but there's like this weird childishness about him because he wears like knee-high socks and like knickerbockers and stuff. It's
he
really
wears
weird.
sneakers. He wears
Yeah.
a full suit and then like sneakers, and it's like that's
And
so
yellow socks.
cool. Like it's like I'm like I really love this look. Like I wish that like this is what big business had aspired to be, was Steve Martin and Looney Tunes back in action.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a movie where things will just happen just in service of the joke, right? Like, and none of that is clearer than the moment when they're like, "How are we supposed to get to Paris?" And then Bugs just does the old Looney Tunes trick of just pulling the screen up and they're in Paris, right? And like, and that's funny, that works. But I don't know why, for some reason, anytime it happened with Steve Martin, it just didn't work for me. Like there was this clear like, this comes out of nowhere. This is a complete non sequitur. Like, isn't that hilarious? And when the tunes do it, when the funny cartoon people do it, I'm okay with it. But when the human tries to do it, I just couldn't get behind it, you know?
So I think you have just stumbled into the actual explanation for Steve Martin. And I mean, this is insane. If what I'm about to say has even a grain of truth, it would be completely banana pants. I wonder, because part of this was Joe Dante trying to say that these characters need to be just viewed as cartoon characters. And we need to understand that society, when something is animated, when something is a talking animal, we view it differently, and we do not treat it with the same gravitas or sincerity that we would treat it if it were a human doing or saying these things. So to have a human basically embodying everything that makes a Looney Tune, you have this juxtaposition to show, yes, if a person were stuttering all the time, it wouldn't be funny. But if it's a pig in a waistcoat, that's hilarious. And it's and like in a weird way, I think that whole thing where you're like, it works when it's a cartoon, it doesn't work when it's Steve Martin. That just seems like the point of it. And it unsettles you so much. Like, you are never comfortable with him as a person.
Right.
Because of that performance. But there are so many other characters. I mean, there's not really. Like, it's weird to call this movie Looney Tunes Back in Action, because the only real tunes featured are Bugs and Daffy.
Yeah, I mean, we get cameos from everybody else.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like,
they all have these little cameos, but it's not like Space Jam where they're all working together in a common goal. It is very much Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck team up with like two popular actors of the time, and let's make a movie.
Yeah, I mean, if we were going to do it in, like numerically, like let's talk about like hard cold facts, right? In Space Jam, I would say that like Bugs and Daffy definitely get more screen time than the other tunes. They're the ones that go to the real world and all that sort of stuff. So like they get maybe 60% screen time, whereas like 40% is shared by all. In this movie, they get like 85% screen time, whereas like 15% is shared with other tunes. So like there's a weird shift to give them even more screen time in this one. That definitely kind of makes it feel like it's not a full-on Looney Tunes movie at all moments. Right.
And that's why, like, I look at the title as Looney Tunes Back in Action. It's like, well, it's kind of like Bugs and Daffy back in action. And then the Looney Tunes are there because, I don't know, brand recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just weird. And I think, like, if the movie weren't called Looney Tunes Back in Action, that wouldn't bother me at all. Like you just said with the breakdown of Space Jam. Like a 60-40 split, that I wouldn't have even noticed that.
Right.
Right? like, as I think back to that movie, it's like, yeah, like, I know that they go to Michael Jordan's house to get Michael Jordan, but then it's everybody training together and doing stuff.
Yeah.
But then this movie, it's the only ones that, like, you kind of expect to see in the real world are Bugs and Daffy. But then in weird ways, the two cowboys, I can't think of either of their names. Yosemite Sam's
right-hand man, yeah.
Yeah. Like, they get more time than almost any other tune in this film.
They get more time than Foghorn Leghorn, who's in that same scene as them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, exactly. Like, they...
Right?
Yeah, to the fact that I forgot that Foghorn Leghorn was in that scene.
Exactly.
I say.
It's a waste of Sylvester and Tweety. I really love the moment where we see other Tweety birds, and then for that to not even end up being the real them, which I get that, like, it was because, like, for the joke it's not.
Yeah, because you're not gonna get me wrong. Because there was this moment where, like, Tweety's like, "Oh, so that's where I come from," and then he's wearing a dashiki, and it's like, okay, I mean, like, that would unfortunately bring up questions today.
Yes.
That would be a questioned joke in 2019. But then I'm like, but then it's even worse when it's revealed that Tweety is not really Tweety doing that.
Yeah.
And it's like, and I wonder, there's this little part of me that wondered, is it okay that Tweety Bird was in a dashiki because it wasn't the real Tweety Bird? It was someone in a costume pretending to be Tweety Bird.
For sure. Like, when you have these conversations about like, you know, what is offensive, what's not, and all of this, at what point do you start drawing a line? Because if you're going to take some of it, you have to take all of it, maybe. But, like, so the idea that, like, if you're going to take at face value that it's upsetting that Tweety is in this position, you have to also remember that that's not actually him if you're going to take everything in this movie as that grounded reality, right?
Well, I mean, like, it's one of those things. It's what I always look at is in Ninja Turtles, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? I had to do it. I had to somehow get it back to it. It's animation. The fact that the foot soldiers are robots in the cartoon is 100% so they're not killing humans.
Right.
Like, that's it. That is the only reason they're fighting robots. It is not because boys like robots in 1987. It is 100% a justification to standards and practices that no. They're fighting robots.
Yeah.
So they could do whatever they want to them. It's like when stormtroopers were revealed to be humans in suits. There were people who were like, "Oh God, the stuff they've done to them. I just assumed they were robots." Or, because I was watching Frisky Dingo today, it's like when it's revealed that the Xticles are guys in suits, too. Yeah. And everybody just assumes that they're robots.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, if we don't view it as, like, a living human thing, then we're not as offended if stuff is done to it or if it's treated some kind of way.
Well, and that's clear in and taken to extremes by I was going to say Seth Rogen, Seth MacFarlane, and in Family Guy and American Dad and all that, because, like, they openly admit the reason that they created characters like Brian or Roger in American Dad was so that they could do things with those characters that you could say to the FCC and say, like, hey, like, that's not a human doing those things, like smoking and drinking, you know, and then like the amount of smoking that you see Brian doing in the first, like, 3 or 4 seasons of that show. And they openly admit that, like, they had that character and they made him a dog so that they could do things like that with him because that is allowed, whereas having a human doing that stuff is actually legitimately not, right? And it's weird where that line is drawn there.
Right.
You know, it's bizarre, like, and as much as it always feels like the conclusion that we always come to is that this conversation about offensive behavior and what's offensive and what's not has to be a continued open conversation. Like, you can't start establishing rules, but you also can't say everything's okay. Like, you can't call things fine just because you feel they're fine. You have to have these conversations and figure out why it might be okay to you, but not other people. So, like, you need to keep talking about this stuff. And it's weird when we hit these walls of things that somebody has tried to put, like straight up legislation out there, like rules and regulations about how to do this stuff. The idea that an animal or a non-human character like Bender can misbehave on screen in certain ways because it's not as bad as if a human does it is ridiculous to me. Because anybody out there that you're going to admit is connected enough to a cartoon to learn behaviors from it, and I fully believe that there are people out there that feel that way. Like as much as you might feel like the idea that it is a cartoon doing these things, you don't necessarily find it as offensive, and I can totally see that, and I agree with that in many ways with my own self and my watching habits. I know for a fact that there are people out there that watch these things, that there are kids out there that watch these things, and they do learn bad behaviors from this stuff, and like to not recognize that stuff is dangerous. So like again, it has to be a continued conversation. It can't be a finished one that's said and done. And I think that's maybe the other big thing with this particular movie that I take a little bit of issue with is I think you're completely right. As I think this is a lot of this movie is Joe Dante taking a stand about like humor and about cartoons and about specifically these cartoons, the Looney Tunes and what they are. And I don't think one man has the right to do that and can do that successfully. I think part of the reason this movie does not succeed in 2003 and does not get remembered as fondly as Space Jam is because this one person tried to set these established rules for this universe in a way that people were just like, nah, like you can't do that.
Yeah, it's like a manifesto re the Looney Tunes. But what I will say, silver lining about this film, along the same lines of this needs to be a continued conversation, this movie, even though it's trying to be a manifesto, does touch on a lot of things that we are still talking about today. Mm-hmm. So that proves that it needs to be a continual conversation. Because had we just decided in 2005, it's cool for any man to wear a dress, it's funny, then it's wrong. It wouldn't be that, right? Like, there needs to be levels of it, and we need to be accepting that sometimes what is funny is going to change. Mm-hmm. But on that same line, since I talk about censorship, that doesn't necessarily mean we have to get rid of all the historical documents that went against whatever the new normal is.
For sure. Yeah.
Because how else will we learn? Right? Like if we can't say that we said this was okay when the Looney Tunes were first around, but now we know that it's not okay. Like, I understand why Coal Black and Them Seven Dwarfs is not available anywhere. Right. I understand that. But at the same time, you watch something like that and you're like, this is what Looney Tunes was. This is what animation was.
Yeah, this is what these guys were producing and putting out in front of audiences, and this is
what audiences were loving. Yeah. They were, and not only putting in front of audiences, but it wasn't like audiences are like, ugh, no, I don't want to watch that. They're like, I want more of that.
Yeah,
that, and that's the interesting thing. We have been talking for an hour and 7 minutes. We haven't really focused on the Bren Master. Can we just lightning round his performance in this film?
Well, let me say that the reason I think we haven't really been focusing on it is he does exactly what his character is supposed to do in this movie. He shows up. He's the handsome leading man. He saves the day. He gets to be the multifaceted action hero. He gets to be in a spy movie, in an adventure movie, in a comedy buddy comedy cop scene in everything in Las Vegas. Right? The car chase is amazing. His driving. So I think the reason we haven't talked about it much is because as much as this movie has a lot going on with it, like Brendan Fraser he does the work for it. He shows up and he does the work.
That's basically what I was going to say, except for the fact that I would like to just shine the light on his character of DJ Drake being a stuntman. And you see those mummy movies? I'm in them more than Brendan Fraser. Like, that joke is hilarious.
Yeah.
And the joke at the end where, and that's where he gets to shine. That's the Brendan Fraser History Month moment of this film for me, is when he gets to play that exaggerated version of himself that DJ Drake punches in the face.
Yes.
Because you know that he is enjoying every single second of that scene.
I think more than Inkheart, I think you could see him having fun in this movie.
Yes.
You know, and I don't think that's because he wasn't having fun doing Inkheart. I think he was just, it was a different type of work that he was doing. Whereas this movie was much more fun, much more jokey, much more, you know, and you could tell in scenes with him that he was having a blast, like jumping over Daffy Duck and things like that. Like it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, and it lends to this movie, a film where Steve Martin gets to be an embodiment of a cartoon character, and then Brendan Fraser gets to have fun too. But in Inkheart, where he basically has to be afraid of his power, it would be weird if Mo was like, "Man, you see that cyclone I just made? I did that.
Yeah.
I read The Wizard of Oz, and I did that."
We also can't ignore the weird Doom Patrol connection. We'll talk more about it once we get to Doom Patrol, but him and Timothy, not Timothy Hutton. What's his name?
Timothy Oliphant.
No,
Timothy Dalton.
Timothy
Bam!
Dalton. We both did it.
We totally Timothy'd this.
Yeah. Timothy Dalton. Him and Timothy Dalton appearing in this movie together. You know, only really getting one scene together, but the connection being there. I'm curious going forward, if there's anything about their relationship.
Yeah, you know what? Timothy Dalton was a great get for this movie.
Fantastic. Again, showed up, did what he needed to do. You know, we mentioned Jenna Elfman earlier, but then never really went back to her. But also, fantastic job. Like everybody that was in this movie is clearly working and clearly like having fun and doing their thing. It's just for them, it all clicks into place perfectly. For some weird reason, the weird stuff with Steve Martin just never worked for me.
Oh, well, speaking of the weird stuff with Steve Martin, I almost believe that boardroom shoot was like, we're going to put you guys in a room for 4 hours, and Steve Martin's going to talk at you.
Talk at you. Yeah.
And you feel free to, if he acknowledges you, you feel free to talk.
Yeah.
But other than that, you're going to be there. Except for like the scene where Ron Perlman gets eaten.
Ron Perlman gets it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's scripted. But other than that, it totally feels like they're just like, Steve Martin, go have fun.
Yeah.
You guys getting paid double for today. Because you're going to have to listen to Steve Martin just go crazy for 4 hours.
Oh, man.
And it was
this movie.
Can I tell you something really weird, too? Like, it's not related to Brendan Fraser History Month. It's related to, I watched Looney Tunes Back in Action yesterday, and then I saw The Hustle, the, like, Die-Staff remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Yeah.
And all I could think was, oh, man, Steve Martin is so good in Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Yeah.
Like, if I had to list
Michael
some
Caine,
of
right?
his... Yep, Michael Caine. If I had to list some of his best performances, easily top 5 for me.
Mm-hmm.
Easily. So it was cool getting to see that, and then, like, watching Rebel Wilson do her take on Freddie Benson was awesome. Go see The Hustle. I can't stress enough how good The Hustle was.
Awesome. Good.
And I don't know if I can say without any without a doubt, I can say without a doubt that it's not just good because I'm so familiar with Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Because Dale, someone who has never seen Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, enjoyed it on a completely different level. So it's not just for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels fans. It's just for fans of good movie making.
Nice.
Yeah. Anything that you want to add before we give our names out and such?
No, like, see Looney Tunes Back in Action. I think it's a hell of a fun time to like get drunk and hang out with your family and like just watch. Like it's a good time.
It's just a fun movie.
Yeah, like it's ridiculous, like, but it's knowing that going into it, I think you'll have a good time.
Excellent. So this has been the Stay Report, Brendan Fraser History Month. This was Looney Tunes Back in Action. Our next movie is going to be Journey to the Center of the Earth. So go find it, watch it. I don't think I've ever seen it, if I have to be completely honest.
Is this the first time we're gonna get to talk about like The Rock taking over a Brendan Fraser role? I forget if we've done The Mummy in the past. It weirdly happens a lot. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, they work together and there's shuffles and it's fun.
Yeah. I guess G.I. Joe, if you want to count Brendan Fraser's cameo for, well, we'll talk about it.
Brendan Fraser is General Hawk, and he is credited as General Hawk. So yeah, and also quick shout out to Say Report Jr. We're recording this beforehand, right? Because I'm going away at the end of May, so there's some behind the scenes for you. People love that stuff. People love Inside Baseball, I guess. I don't know. I like it. So we're recording this, but tomorrow in real timeline, myself and Dale and Zach from Say Report Jr. are going to another free video game day event. So
Nice.
I am more than certain that they will be discussing that on the episode of Say Report Jr. that you're going to get to listen to after this one. So look out for free video game day event stuff.
Woohoo!
But until that time, if you want to talk to Sejohn about why Space Jam is the superior movie and Looney Tunes Back in Action should be forgone forever, you can find him on Twitter at Siege versus the World.
And if you want to explain to Devon that they exist in two different universes so they don't have to compete with one another, you can get him at Devon D. Decker.
And until next time, the heavenly blisses of his kisses fill me with ecstasy. He's sweet just like chocolate candy, or just like honey from the bee. Oh, I'm just wild about William, and William's wild about cannot do without Will. He's wild about me.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.
That's all, folks.